Aloha and welcome to today's presentation. I'm JayDreamerZ. If you're new to my channel, welcome. It's good to see everybody. Today we're going to be discussing in detail evidence that may support a theory that there was an old world reset. And we're going to talk all about, I'm going to show all kinds of images here behind me, and we're going to jump into discussions in the chat about this old world and all the strange and anomalous things that happened during the times of around the 1800s, weird things that happened all throughout history that indicate that there's something wrong with the story. There's something wrong with the narrative that we've been given. So I want to welcome everybody to my channel. And if you're in the chat, I want to say hello to everybody. Let me just give a quick hello to everybody in the chat. All right, I see a bunch of people that are there right now. Thumbs up if you can hear me. I fixed up the audio, I fixed up the lighting and everything, so hopefully we'll have a great presentation today. And if you have any information or thoughts or theories on this resetting of the old world, and we're going to talk about many different types of resets too, I'd like to hear it. I'd like to see what you have for me in the chat, and for everybody else, what have you learned? What have you studied on? So we're going to jump right in and check this out. I see Donut was the first one to give some thumbs ups. Thank you so much, Donut. Appreciate you. And Raw with Jesus, Adriana Martinez, Kevin Yost. All right, everybody, thank you so much for giving me the thumbs up so we can check that audio. Now we're going to jump directly into things. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my slideshow and start this. And we're going to jump into the old world reset topic. All right, so the old world reset. When was the old world? Okay, so when we discuss the old world, first I find it helpful to figure out where are we now? It's difficult to talk about times past whenever we're a lost tribe, that we've been wandering around for so long, not knowing where home was, not knowing where we are, not knowing what actual date it is or what time it is. So I find it helpful to figure out where we are now. If we see remnants of an old world, then it stands to reason that we ourselves are in the new world, the new age, the new order, etc. And this is one of the reasons why I don't fear some sort of new world order happening, because I know it's already in place. There have been many old worlds. Those which happened more than one cycle ago are typically referred to as ancient. An old world, to myself and to others, refers to the worldwide civilization which existed prior to a cataclysmic cycle, which I believe may simply be a polarity shift, also an age. So I believe that this is how time was kept from reset to reset, from age to age, especially those larger apocalyptic cycles. And I'll discuss the smaller ones here as well. Now, looking back upon the ages of man, for example, Bronze Age, the Enlightenment, the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, we clearly see mounds upon mounds of records which indicate that the 1,000-year period known as the Dark Ages, medieval or Middle Ages, was fraught with descriptions of ghosts, monsters, wizardry, sorcery, magic, mutants, strange skies, mysterious fog, and an electrically amplified atmosphere. Now, if these cycles are determined by atmospheric depressurization due to worldwide polarity reversals, we should expect to find patterns of events which exhibit pressure release, or major low pressure systems, or have telltale signs of a polarity shift. For example, electromagnetic phenomenon, animals acting strange in mass, major gas release events, etc. So, on the surface, our world occasionally depressurizes. The inner Earth, or the hollow Earth that exists under our feet, it also depressurizes from time to time. Now, we do find this. We do find these examples. If the Dark Age was the last old world, and it lasted approximately from 500 AD to 1500 AD, a 1,000-year period, we should find correlating low-pressure systems in the Northern Hemisphere, and we do. In about the year 536 AD, that time period was marked by years of extreme cold and mysterious atmospheric haze, which lasted over a year. In about the year 1300 AD is when the Little Ice Age began, which is traditionally considered to follow the medieval warming period. Okay, so one of the reasons I believe that things warmed up during the medieval times is because that was an age of light. It wasn't the Dark Ages. It was an age where terrestrial beams of ionized gases shot up from the hollow recesses of our world and illuminated our world on the surface, also energizing it and therefore heating it up. Now, I'm going to read you an example of this from the medieval times. And we're just going to use the medieval times as a stepping stone to the old world, which comes in a bit. Now, this is from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. And it says here, this is an eyewitness account of those terrestrial beams of light, those pillars shooting up into the sky and people seeing them. It says here, there were many shipmen on the sea. Oh, this was from the date 1122 AD. There were many shipmen on the sea and on fresh water who said that they saw in the northeast, level with the earth, fire, huge and broad, which anon waxed in length up to the Velkin, which is their way of saying the solid firmament. And the Velkin undid itself in 4 parts, and the Velkin fought against it, or fought against this light, as if it would quench it. And the fire waxed, nevertheless, up to the heaven, or the firmament. The fire they saw in the day dawn, and it lasted until it was light over all. And that was the 7th day before the Ides of December. Also, in the same chronicle, back in the year 774, they say, this year in 774 also appeared in the heavens a red crucifix after sunset. The Mercians and the men of Kent fought at Otford, and wonderful serpents were seen in the land of the South Saxons. Now, I just happened to see on my slideshow here, I'm going to stop that and go back a picture. This is actually an image. This is a picture of what they saw. This is an image of what they saw when the sky looked like it was ripped into 4 different parts, right? This is something like what they saw. Notice that there's clouds all the way around this circular object, which they say is a part of the firmament itself, and it seems to be divided into 4 quadrants. I believe that this was a time whenever the light shone upwards towards a reflective surface, which is the firmament itself, probably made out of ice, and they were able to see what was directly below, or the land below, which is how I believe many ancient cartographers were able to map out areas of the world that they had never been to before. They simply looked up at the firmament, which reflected back our land to us because it was being lit up from below by all of these different terrestrial beams of energy in the form of ionized gases after a pressure release, right? So I just wanted to stop and share that one real quick, but let me go ahead and play this slideshow again. All right, cool. And I'm actually going to bring it back a little bit. That works. All right, cool. Let's continue on. All right, now, in 1300 AD, so the Dark Ages last from approximately 500 to 1500 AD. In 1300 AD is an approximate time to begin the New World, as it begins periods such as the Renaissance, the Age of Exploration, the Reformation, Enlightenment, etc. This begins what I refer to, and others, as the Season of Satan, or SOS. Around 1300, the following events kick off the Season of Satan. 1. The Little Ice Age begins. Huge depressurization event. The large volcanic eruptions and earthquake that happened in the forms of Mount St. Helens, Mount Hecla, and some others. The Black Death. The Great Famine. The 100 Years' War, the Anasazi disappearing. So you have to imagine during the Middle Ages, during the Dark Ages, that was actually a time of light and energy, and our world was becoming energized, as were we, and it had an effect on people. But once that light retracted, once the Dark Ages were over and done with, then we have whatever energy is left up here on the surface as it retracts, and the Earth starts to charge it and pull it back inward, and thus we have shortening of lifespans, sicknesses, famines, plagues, and all these types of things that are introduced. Now, I found evidence supporting the happening of destructive or creative worldwide cyclical events which I have dubbed the plasma apocalypse, with smaller cycles of cataclysmic shifts or resets in between the larger cycles of the plasma apocalypse. With each smaller pressure release, or a cataclysm, more water rises up from within the Earth, as the inner Earth also is depressurizing. This causes liquefaction and soil displacement, and thus the sinking of surface structures. Over time, known lands become phantom islands, disappearing from view and from memory. Eventually, so much pressure builds over time that during the next great release of pressure, the surface waters will float up from the land and will rest for an age without an ocean. This is a brief description of my theory, and it's not really mine, but I'm just talking from my own perspective. The Dark Ages was a larger cataclysm. They vary in size, similar to the lifespans of the Earth's electromagnetic timeline. The period of time from around the 1700s is a strong candidate for another cataclysmic shift, although smaller in comparison to that of the beginning and the end of the Dark Ages, or the Deluge. All right, now, we're going to jump into a list. We're going to start things off and kick things off with a list of strange and anomalous events that happened throughout the 1700s or the 18th century. And these we put together. We don't consider each one individually as one-off circumstances, but we put them together, and together they compile weighty evidence, mounds of evidence that suggest that there's more to the story than what we've been told. Now, with that, I'm going to do a quick ad for my books. If you're interested in this type of thing, you might want to check out my books, and we'll be right back to continue on.
In a time when an ancient cataclysm is about to return, one book holds the key to unlocking the biggest secret in all of history. JayDreamerZ presents Ancient Oblivion, the Plasma Apocalypse. Study it, and you'll discover the very real details behind the reoccurring event that resets civilizations and reshapes the entire world. Bridging the gap between fiction and fact, this book is a must-have for all truth seekers. Then in his second book, you'll learn about the one place of refuge from this world storm. You'll explore the ends of the earth, find the fountain of youth, and envision yourself enveloped in the vapor canopy. In Ancient Oblivion, Return to Hyperborea. Available now. Order direct from JayDreamerZ and receive your very own autographed copy. Go to JayDreamerZ.com for more information on our Ancient Oblivion and the Plasma Apocalypse, and sign up for a free 24-hour cram session with a complimentary day pass. The end is near, so order now before it's too late.
All right, sweet. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me. I'm JayDreamerZ, and today we're talking about the old world resets and evidence for these cycles that happen, cataclysms, resets, apocalypses, and the importance of it is that we can learn from the past and we can look into the future and see what is coming, especially if all of these things are cyclical. All right, now let me get back to, we're going to start with the 18th century. So I'm actually going to stop this slideshow real quick, as I'm going to point out some things here with the pictures that are being presented. All right, now we're going to start off things with the 1700s and strange and anomalous events that happened throughout the 1700s. Here's just some. The Basilica Cross seen in the sky in 1517 in Rome, Italy. A cross-shaped light was reported in the sky over Rome, interpreted by some as a divine omen. Number 2, celestial phoenix over Nuremberg, 1561. Now, many people have seen this woodcut of the Nuremberg news, showing all these strange lights, balls, columns, pillars that seem to be floating in the sky. There's celestial battles that have been seen over time, what people interpreted as angels and whatnot fighting each other, which is, to me, electromagnetic phenomenon. Specifically in 1566 in Switzerland, residents saw glowing orbs and strange formations in the sky, with accounts describing them as resembling crosses or celestial beings. We also have aurora beams of light in 1621 in Europe, the first detailed record of aurora borealis over southern Europe. Bright beams of red and white light were mistaken for supernatural signs. Now I'm going to show you some of these beams in a bit. Fire in the sky over Boston, 1719, Massachusetts. A strange, slow-moving fireball was seen across the sky, leaving a glowing trail. Some thought it was a divine sign, while others debated it was a meteor. And we also have the Great Meteor Procession of 1783 in Europe and North America. A long-lasting, slow-moving meteor event was seen across the sky, with reports describing beams of light and fiery streaks resembling swords and crosses. This is exactly what we would expect whenever we have these light pillars that shoot up from caves and openings in the earth. The gases that rush up through the earth become ionized. They shoot up in a pillar, and then they start to spread out and branch and split in half at the top, giving us cruciforms and the ancient vav and tent pegs and columns and pillars and whatnot. All right, cool. Let me get the slideshow put back up here, and we'll continue on. Actually, I think I'm just going to do the slideshow manually. All right, cool. All right, now, so here's some examples. Lisbon, there was a huge earthquake, a mighty earthquake that toppled buildings, and you know, all of these great earthquakes to me are depressurization. They have to do with the gases that are being released from inside of the earth, finding their way up through the cracks and crevices, and those create earthquake lights. Whenever they become ionized and those gases reach up here and they can ionize, they can combust, they can explode and create wildfires in strange areas and remote places the world across. They create sinkholes and like I said, liquefaction or quicksand and things of that nature. We also have the Great Winter. This is a low pressure system. Low pressure happens whenever there's depressurization of the atmosphere. Not only, but our pressure in this world is constantly changing, dependent upon whether or not the sky opens up and the pressure is released, or if the pressure is released from under our feet, from within the hollow recesses of our world. Now, this one I thought was really interesting about these foxes. I'm going to read this one to you as well. We've got the Great Lisbon Earthquake. That was 1755 was the Great Lisbon Earthquake. Not only was this earthquake one of the deadliest in history, but it also triggered a massive tsunami and widespread fires. Even stranger, it struck on All Saints' Day, leveling churches and killing thousands inside while sparing many brothels and taverns. The year without a summer, that was 1709, another huge low-pressure event. Pressure is huge when it comes to the plasma apocalypse. Europe experienced one of its coldest winters ever recorded, freezing rivers, crops, and livestock where they stood. Some reports say birds fell frozen from the sky and entire communities starved. Now, this one is called the Zora Migration, or the Fox Migration of 1709. During the extreme cold of the Great Frost, thousands of foxes were seen migrating en masse across Europe, invading villages in search of food, and this was something that was almost never documented before or after on such a scale. Let's see, we also have the Berber slave rebellion, where the slaves were talking about, they rebelled against their masters in 1763, and they talked about claiming that they had supernatural protection and that they had returned from the dead to fight their captors. The British Parliament fire from the 1730s. Some reports suggested a supernatural cause of Parliament catching on fire. On multiple occasions, strange, unexplained fires erupted in the Palace of Westminster, leading to whispers of curses or divine warnings. We also have the Hammersmith Ghost Panic of the 1790s. This was a time whenever people talked about ghosts, and ghost stories were real. They weren't just, you know, fanciful or for people to entertain themselves with, but they spoke of ghost stories as a reality, because all of these ghosts are just electromagnetic buildup and plasma and things like that people saw much more often immediately after a time where the world had filled up with plasma and with energy. And so a lot of that was left over, and it takes time for it to recede back into the earth once those beams of light die or are sacrificed or are killed, and they're seen as retreating back down into the underworld. Londoners believed a vengeful ghost was haunting the streets, terrifying people at night. This hysteria led to a vigilante mistakenly killing a man, believing him to be a ghost. We also have the creation of the Paris Catacombs. I'm going to talk about this one here in just a second. Actually, I'll come back to the catacombs in just a minute. We'll go right to the strange comet that was seen in the 1700s. So the strange comet of 1744. Now, what would you say if I said I saw a comet with 2 tails? That'd be weird. What about 3 tails? This comet had 6 tails, and it stretched across a serious length of the sky. If you take your fist and you put it out in front of you, and you do that 8 fist lengths, that's how far this comet stretched across the sky in 1744. This comet was known as Comet de Chazot. It was particular because it had 6 tails that spread out in a fan-like shape, something that was rarely seen before or after. People feared that it was an omen of doom, and there's been many recreations of people drawing it. As you can see here, what is speculated is that the other side, or the head of the comet, was beyond the horizon down here, and that this is the tail of the comet itself. So let's take a closer look at this one, because I study beams of light. I study strange atmospheric phenomenon going all the way back in history and antiquity, where we have seen time and time again pillars of light that are omens of an apocalyptic event, or at the very least, a cataclysmic one. This was also seen in many different ways across the world. This right here is a symbol for the god Lao Tianye, which is a glyph that first appeared in China during the early 15th century. As you can see, we've got the quote-unquote head of the comet, or a circular object in the sky, with these beams that are coming off of it, right? These many tails. We also have, of course, Aten in Egyptian lore. Now, I've talked about Aten many times. I don't believe that Aten is our point of focus up in the heavens or the sun. I believe that this is what I call the apex dome, or a portion of the firmament that is revealed every other cycle, and that plasma comes down from that what people think is a planet or a sun or whatever, and the plasma comes down and it has an effect on life here. Now, this is an example of a comet with 2 tails. Now, academics, first and foremost, academics will tell you this is a snowball, and I'm not even lying. They say this is a snowball, this is a giant slushy that's flying through space, and it's leaving a tail that's like 13 million miles long or some craziness. And then this blue portion over here is plasma. That somehow it's split off into a plasma tail and a dust cloud or whatnot, right? So this is one with 2 tails. This one is actually, I saw this one when I was a kid. This was Hale-Bopp, I believe, right? Back in the 90s. Hale-Bopp stayed in the sky for quite some time. Now here's another comet that you guys may never have seen before. This is just basically, it looks like a fish egg up there in the sky. There is no tail or anything. It did sort of make a tail a little bit later on, but this one's relatively newer. Does this strike you as a comet? How is this even possible, right? In modern academics, this is supposed to be like a solid object that is leaving a trail of whatever behind it because it's flying through space at ridiculous speeds, and so nothing should be in front of the physical object. And yet, we just have this light here in the middle with an aura of light all the way around it, just in a circle, basically, right? Here's another example of it. Here you can sort of see a little bit of light coming off of it here, but this is a more recent strange comet, and strange comets are omens of an apocalyptic and cataclysmic event, and they always have been. Now, as far as comets go, these are examples of aberrations within optics. So those of you out there who are nearsighted, farsighted, or you wear glasses or something, these are different things that the lens of your eye can do whenever the light that's passing through the lens of your eye hits an anomaly, or there's something wrong with your actual lens of your eye. So it creates these aberrations, basically, or points of focus that are out of focus. This one right here is that comet. It's called a spherical aberration. These are more traditional chromatic aberrations, as you can see here. What's happening, and these are astigmatisms at the bottom, what's happening is that the light that passes through the firmament and then meets at a focal point, which we call the sun, and then redistributes into what we call daylight, it is acting abnormally and hitting places it doesn't normally hit, which are inconsistencies in the dome, in the firmament itself. And therefore, it causes these aberrations, or it causes these points of focus to go out of focus, or the stars, basically, to go out of focus. Here's an ancient Chinese drawing when they documented the different types of comets with multiple tails, and oftentimes these tails actually had branches that came up off of them. And that's interesting too, because I believe that these are plasma instabilities. Now, this is also similar to the birth of Jesus or the nativity scene, whenever you have a beam of light that sort of shines down over Jerusalem, and the wise men would follow it, and etc., right? Like I said, there's different versions of it. Now, this is an alchemical drawing of something very similar. We see these beams of light up in the heavens that all reach up to this circular object, or in reality, this dome. It's always a dome. People think that it's just a circular object, but it's a dome that is up there affixed to the firmament. I call it the apex dome. It often has the name Yahweh written on it, right? And all these beams of light are reaching up to the very top of this dome, but the light beams are coming out of mountains. Let's count how many mountains there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mountains with light being emitted from them. These are what I call plasma volcanoes, which is basically every volcano, every other cycle, right? So one cycle, the volcanoes will be radioactive, or, you know, not radioactive, but they'll have lava and stuff like that, where they're melting the metals and stuff. And there's radioactive elements deep down inside of the earth that are going through radioactive decay that heats up, and it heats up all the metals that are inside of the earth. Those metals become liquid form, and they mix with soils and sand and stuff, and that gives us magma or lava. Okay, it's not melted rock, it's melted metal that's mixed with rock and sand and other things too. So anyways, we have these plasma volcanoes. Over here on the edge, you can see this one's hollowed out. People are inside of this hollow mountain working and mining, because this is an area where this is located. I'll tell you right now, this is called the septentrion, or the septentrio. You can find this on many, if not every, ancient map, at the very least going back into the Middle Ages, but even in recent times, they still refer to this as the septentrio. The word septon means 7. And it's also interesting too, you can see the symbols for the planets on each one of these mountains. So 7, septon. Trio does not mean 3. It actually comes from the Proto-Indo-European root word meaning deru, which means trees. Okay, so for example, we've got these mountains, which act as the base of these cosmic trees, or these trees that emit light. These are the trunks of the trees. The tree itself is the beam of light that shoots up and then branches out as it gets higher up into the heavens. There are 7 of those, 7 main ones, that surround a circular island at the North Pole, which I believe to be Hyperborea and the Garden of Eden. So we have these 7 light pillars known as the septentrion at the North Pole, shooting light straight up, and straight up above that place on the firmament is the apex dome, the place where the dome depressurizes and the firmament breaks open. So here we have another example of these lights in the sky, right? So here's another example you can see. I'll pull it down. You've got the sun over here, and the moon is over here. So what is that central circular object with the name of Yahweh, or the tetragrammaton, written inside of it? It is neither the sun nor the moon. It is an ancient light source that we don't have in our world today, but it will return one day. Here we have the 7 beams, once more shooting straight up to a central point in the sky. This is the septentrio. Here's another alchemical drawing that features the 7 mountains, or the septentrio. As you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and Hermes right above it. The name Hermes means, it means har, which means mountain, and then mesh, which means out of the water. So a mountain that comes up out of the water. Hermes represents the central mountain in Hyperborea, at the middle of that paradise-like island, or continent, basically. That central mountain is Hermes. It is the mountain that comes up out of the water, or is born out of the water, and gives birth to that light that shoots high up into the heavens. Now that's represented by Hermes's staff here. The staff is just a beam, but it's got these snakes that wrap around it. This is plasma, and these are the circuits. This is the electrical circuit of the plasma and the energy that is going up and down on this central beam, or Jacob's ladder. Now, usually Hermes is depicted pointing this staff upwards, right? But in this picture, he's pointing it downwards, and we don't see light coming up out of these 7 mountains, or the septentrio. We see what appears to be water going downwards and then emptying out into this hole in the ground, or this bottomless pit that's full of fire. It's because this alchemical drawing, you can see the sun over here, the moon over here. This alchemical drawing depicts a time whenever those beams of light, or the age of light, came to an end, and the light went down or retracted into the earth to charge once more, which is what we see here. Here's another book. This is called A Key to Physics and the Occult Sciences, and you can see over here that they have drawn you a version of Mount Meru. It's a cave, but it's actually a cave that goes down into the earth. This is the top of Mount Meru. They have messed with the perspective so that they can show you what's on the land, but they have brought the cave upwards so that you can see that it goes down into the earth. Now, this also has those beams of light with Hermes, once again, pointing his staff upwards because the beams of light are going upwards. Here's the sun right here. Here's the moon right above my head right there. And if I make it a little darker, we can actually count out those beams of light. Once more, we find that there are 7 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the 7 mountains, or the septon trio, that surround Mount Meru. This is an example of Mount Meru. Mount Meru is the Black Mountain. It is a magnetic mountain, and it is oftentimes symbolized by a wolf that howls straight up at the moon. We know that wolves don't howl at the moon. Where does that come from? It comes from a mountain that is split at the top, which is because it's a volcano, basically. But it's a split mountain, and it's a dark mountain, and right above it is the apex dome, which projects its own image into our sky, giving us the moon, basically. Now, if we draw in the 7 beams of light that surround Hyperborea, or the Garden of Eden, these 7 beams of light, they also help to make a sort of electromagnetic barrier around the island, which acts as like a force field, basically like a plasma Ouroboros, right? So this is what we get. We get these beams of light that are all directly under the apex dome at the North Pole. Now, let's transition. Let's transition more into the old world. We have pictures like this and this where we can see that the old world, the Wild West, and other parts were completely flooded at times, where people are rowing boats in the streets. People have seen pictures and dug up pictures of, excavations, modern excavations, where they're digging underneath houses and they're finding more levels to those houses, where this all used to be covered up in dirt. Even these windows right here were all covered up in dirt. So people started researching, which I like, that people are asking questions and they're wondering, what is this? Why is there all this room underneath these buildings? And then they started to notice similarities. This is the same thing that we use whenever we use comparative mythology to figure out what's going on. We compare the similarities between the stories, right? So one of the similarities is that the buildings often replicate this sort of Greco-Roman type of engineering, right? So people are studying, they're seeing the differences between the water levels in one picture and the water levels in other pictures. And so we have the theory of the mud floods, that many structures actually sank down into the earth. And that does happen. Okay, the earth goes through cycles of flooding and of mud flooding. Like I said, when the inner earth depressurizes, all that pressure goes upwards. It also brings with it gases and liquids and fluids, and water is one of those. So every time we have one of these smaller cataclysms or smaller depressurizations of the inner earth, it floods our world even more. More water rises up and it causes earthquakes and liquefaction and buildings that sink down into the mud. We also have other examples of, for example, after the mud floods, after the most recent mud floods, right? We've got, in some cases, 15, 30, 40 feet of mud that has completely encased and buried ancient temples and other structures. When that is allowed enough time to dry out, then that leads to a dust bowl, which is what you're seeing here, basically. This is the time of the Dust Bowl, and before that as well. But as you can see, people looked at these images and they saw that the United States in particular was being settled, but something doesn't look right. You got all these structures that are all set up, and then it just looks like an apocalypse. It just looks like things are destroyed all throughout many of these ancient cities. There's just dirt and debris all over the place. Many of the structures and the architecture are magnificent, are amazing, are advanced and anachronous to the times that we find them in, right? So this happened all around the world. We see many different examples, like right down here, you can see there's a little cave, a little man-made cave or something right there by the Colosseum. Other examples, look at all of this mud. I mean, that's dry mud, it's dirt or whatever, but you can see that this is all basically mud that just dried up, and people are looking on the internet and finding these things, right? So I believe that all that mud from the last event and the last liquefaction event happened, and it dried up, and it took decades for it to dry up, and when it finally did, and the winds kicked up, they would blow all of that dust. Now, this is an example from antiquity, where ancient temples were dug up. And as you can see, the columns are 30, 40 feet down into the mud. That entire temple complexes sank down into the earth, just like, for example, the giants, which I'll get to here in a bit, or the titans that also were said to have sank down into Tartarus, which is also related to Tartaria and whatnot. But you can see clear evidence that something happened here, and modern academics will try to say, oh, well, that's because there's so many random mudslides in all of these places that they just cover it up with mud all the way 40 feet of mud. Mudslides do exist, and that's evidence for the quote-unquote mountains melting and whatnot, as well as they just fall apart during these worldwide earthquakes. However, this is also evidence that these objects may have sank down into the earth, that these temples and structures used to be much higher up. So, for example, you can see this one from 1836. Here's the bottom of it, and you can see where the bottom used to be over here on the right. Let me actually pull that in here. So over here on the right, you can see the darker shaded areas where the mud used to be. Here's another good example of the mud floods and people doing their due diligence, researching things on the internet. And by the way, I want to say this too. The internet it's just as good a place as any to research, okay? You'll have different experiences in a library versus on the internet versus reading books for yourself. And these are all valid areas of exploration and of learning and whatnot. It would be wise for us to approach with caution and consider all things, adding what resonates to the library of our own experiences and our own thoughts and research, right? Now, here's another example. 1918, coal miners were astonished to uncover petrified tree stump that was entombed within a coal seam. So here's a tree that way down inside of the earth, inside of a coal stream. Now, coal is just basically burnt up organic, material. Basically, it's turned into like charcoal and stuff like that, right? So trees and plants and whatnot. This one was petrified, found deep down inside of the earth. Strange things that sank down or were covered up by the earth itself, right? This kind of reminded me of a movie. This is reflected to us in the movies all of the time because the movies are nothing new. Nothing new is under the sun, right? The movies are showing back to us. This is why we're so entertained by them, because the closer the movies are to the truth, the more they resonate with us. So for example, I could pull up a million movies that have similar themes, but this one is called A Boy and His Dog. In the movie A Boy and His Dog, this boy and his dog are in a futuristic version of Arizona. And you see all of this, what appears to be desert that they're walking through. This is actually mud. And the city of Phoenix, I think it was, in the movie, is down underneath all of this desert. And in the movie, they actually have to dig holes in the ground that open up into like ancient houses or malls or whatever, and they go down inside of the earth. This is showing you the post-apocalyptic version of the mud flood event after the muds have already caused everything to sink, including entire cities like Phoenix in the movie, so that people dig down into them to, to get information or things that are useful or valuable. Here's some more examples of the mud floods. Now, it's not just buildings. It's not just architecture. This can be seen across time. Huge megalithic stones, clearly, like this one in Baalbek. This one clearly sank down into the earth. It's not like over hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years, dust just accumulated and only in this part of the megalithic stone, right? They dig it up and this is what it looks like. This is what liquefaction looks like, and this is the Sphinx before it was actually dug up. All you could really see of the Sphinx and the pyramids too. Okay, these are covered in dirt and sand and debris that is clearly evident of an apocalyptic cycle or a cataclysmic event. The Olmec heads are no exception either. Now, let's take a look at the, and these are all just for an example, right? Let's take a look at the Moai from Easter Island. Right? You notice that they're all tilted and stuff like this. People thought that they were just heads to begin with. And then they dug them up and they realized, oh my God, these go all the way down into the earth. Now let's ask a reasonable question. Were they just buried down inside of it? Why would you make a huge statue, which is for people to look at? Right? Commemorations or statues in honor of something, and then just bury most of it up to its neck. That doesn't make sense. What does make sense is that earthquakes shook and the inner earth depressurized, which caused liquefaction, or the inner earth waters to rise up, which mix with the soil, and it creates mud and clay. And what happens is the heavy objects, they start tilting down to one side, or they start leaning over, or they just straight up sink down into the earth. These are modern portrayals of liquefaction from earthquakes that we're aware of right now. This might as well be a Moai in the ancient world, right? This is exactly what they look like, sort of tilted to one side, halfway sunk down into the earth, and this is caused by liquefaction. And I believe that this is evidence of a cataclysm that happened where the earth was vibrating and shaking and the waters rose up and these heavy objects sank down, just like buildings do, cars do, and other objects during large earthquakes. This one right here is all these cars actually sank in New Zealand, I think it was, near Christchurch. There was a huge earthquake and it caused liquefaction. This is all dried up. So once the earth starts shaking and the waters rise, things sink down into it. But once that vibration stops, then pretty quickly, all that mud and stuff starts to sort of dry up as the water recedes, and then it becomes very solid and it locks in and traps objects that are down underneath it. These people are standing right behind it. They're not sinking down into the mud or anything, but this car is completely stuck. This is an example of what liquefaction looks like. When you have a very wet ground and you start vibrating it and start moving it around, the water rises up and it makes it more liquid form, right? So beings, people, objects, and many proofs and evidences from the ancient world become lost. They sink down inside of the earth and they become covered up quite physically, quite actually, and quite historically. Not always by humans, but Mother Nature herself covers these things up. Now, the giants and the titans of old were also said to have sank down into the mud during the Great Deluge. Okay, there's many rumors about the titans, giants having become petrified, having sank down into the earth. If you're that big, there's not a lot of places to hide unless you can find cavernous systems large enough to house you or protect you. But otherwise, this seems to have made its way into our collective subconscious that we know titanic beings sank down into the earth during some sort of an event. That event was the deluge, which is why we have so many architectural, statues and stuff like that that depict giants and titans that are sinking down into the water or down into the earth as they're reaching up and trying to stay afloat or trying to stay up above. Here's a really creepy one that they put into the water, and it makes it, the water levels can make it actually look like the girl is drowning in the water. Let me check my chat. I just want to double check, make sure that the connection's okay and everything's good. Okay, 434 people watching right now. Welcome to my channel. I'm honored to have you here. Let's continue on. All right, so these are different examples of liquefaction at work in the ancient past. Now, keep in mind, this happens periodically from time to time to time, and our modern world is no exception. We've gone a long time without having these types of cataclysmic events, but they will return. Now, immediately after these cataclysmic events and liquefaction, the world, the surface, becomes a very muddy, swamp-like place, full of quicksand and dangers. People become caked in mud. You have to imagine people surviving these types of cataclysms and earthquakes and stuff, walking around in this thick mud. I don't know how many people have ever, lived in a place where if it rains even a little bit, especially out in the country or something, that the mud becomes so thick and so sticky that you can lose your shoes or your boots just walking around in it, and sometimes it's hard to even get out of it, right? So there's this is the rise of the mud people, basically. And this is also possibly where the story comes from of Adam, or the first man, being born out of clay, or being made out of clay, coming up out of the earth after this huge liquefaction event, or this worldwide earthquakes that happened. Like I said, it's also portrayed to us in movies, in fiction, in fantasy. This right here is a clip from The Princess Bride. As you guys remember, they went into the fire swamp, right? Well, it's a fire, that's our world. They're just showing your world right back to you. They're showing real, actual history, but they're cartoonifying it and making it larger than life. But this is why it's so interesting to me. The fire swamp is what our world turns into temporarily after each one of these apocalyptic cycles. So there's 3 dangers of the fire swamp. There's ROUSs, large rodents. That's due to gigantism, with the influx of fresh oxygen the world across, and less pressure in the atmosphere, which allows things to grow much bigger with less pressure being put on it. So we have giant rodents, gigantism. We have quicksand, basically, in the form of the liquefaction. And then we have all this gas that's being released and combusting, which creates these spurts, these fire spurts, in the movie at the very least, right? Now, all of this mud and clay and debris and rocks and gravel and sand and all these things mixed together in many places created a natural form of cement, also known as a geopolymer, which people were easily able to shape and manipulate into whatever shape they wanted, and just let it simply dry out. As the pressure starts to increase over time, so will the density of objects. So these things become much more dense over time, and they harden. And they were able to cast them and form them into any shape, not chiseled, not cut out of some bedrock or some quarry or something somewhere. But this was survivors, I believe, of cataclysmic cycles that used the natural resources that were given to them to protect themselves and to be able to make these structures and temples and things like that. Now, let's get more into the modern age, or more recent events in the last few hundred years. This is probably one of the most shown images when it comes to the quote-unquote old world and evidence for an old world reset. People will take a look at this. Oh, I want to say thanks to LM in the chat for the $20 donation. That was very kind of you. Thank you. So this says Chicago, Illinois, United States, 1893. This is Chicago, Illinois in the year 1893, in the Wild West. So naturally, people are going to look at this, which was, this was basically a little mini city that they say was created for the World's Fair. We're going to take a look at the World's Fairs, or the World's Unfair, here in a bit. But people were looking at these types of pictures, these types of images, and they're like, look at the structure. Look at the architecture. They have obelisks, they have domes, they have this magnificent structure all over the place where, you know, it really contrasts with like the horse and buggy lifestyle, with hammers and chisels and people living in log cabins and, you know, just trying to survive, trying to make it, going out hunting for food and stuff, right? So people are examining these ancient, some of the first pictures that were ever taken, going back and re-examining them, taking a look at them and imagining, using their imaginations to wonder what was going on here. And by the way, they did have these carriages that were automated back then too. So I thought there would be horses on here, but there's not. They had these automated carriages. This was probably just before the Model T came out. Very interesting things. But look at these wonderful statues that they had all over the place. Huge ponds, columns, pillars. See these spikes coming up off of the buildings here? We're going to take a look at those too. There's reasons for them. See how it's automated? This little carriage right here. So people, for good reason, are taking a second look or reconsidering the official narrative and the history that's been given to us, especially about our recent history. We have people who found this country, right? When they found it, or they became the founding fathers or founders of this modern society or whatever, what they found was already left over. Now, some people jump to saying, well, this structure was already here. It wasn't built during the World's Fair or whatever. That's besides the point for me, because I believe that there is an ancient tribe that stems from the North Pole that is kicked out of Eden or kicked out of Hyperborea every other cycle. And they're left to become these lost tribes that wander, that make their way down from the Northern Hemisphere as they're nomadic, and they settle from place to place using advanced knowledge and strength and other things to take up positions of power and ultimately to rule the rest of the world as they integrated themselves into society. These pictures are telling. They're telling at the very least of what once was compared to what is now. Here's a huge contrast. You see this nothing but dirt. A whole huge field of just dirt and all these people lined up on a makeshift sidewalk that looks like it's made out of planks of wood, leading up to this magnificent ancient Greco-Roman temple complex. Now, it's easily dismissed by some, saying, oh, it's just the World's Fair. Oh, these are all temporary structures. It was just a big to-do, and it's just fanciful, and it's just to kind of show off that, you know, society is looking forward to the future. Well, if looking forward to the future, why wouldn't they make futuristic buildings? Why would they make the future look like the past? Unless the past is repeating itself, unless we're on cycles and we know, or they knew, the builders knew that what was coming. They knew that this is what the world will look like in the future after these next resets, because these buildings, the architecture that went into building these things, was used to work with the natural electrical amplified currents that were within the earth and in the atmosphere itself. So we see many pillars and columns and rods and beams and poles and things of that nature. So they replicated that. They also did that in ancient times, especially during the Middle Ages, where you have castles surrounded by water. It's because of the electrical properties of these things. Also, there was monsters at the time. Okay, all throughout the Middle Ages, monsters are real, have always been real, in different forms. Not all of them are evil or bad, but people made these things to protect themselves from inner earth, hollow earth, giant creatures, whether they be insectoid, lizard-like, animalistic, or humans as well, right? So they protected themselves. The population was much lower during these times, so it's not like they constantly encountered enemies and bad guys or whatever. There was much more monsters back then. And so people built these, usually on top of solid ground or bedrock. Huge towers with poles and spires and beams, often in interesting configurations, but oftentimes surrounded by water too. Here's one that's basically out in the middle of the ocean with a huge ramparts all the way around it and a wall and everything. People look back at these architectural marvels and they wonder and they ask themselves, what is the purpose? What is the reasoning? There must be more to it. It must serve a function other than simply it looks pretty. It's artistic. It looks nice. This right here, this was built to work with the different times that people lived in. The world today, we don't understand this type of architecture, or really technology is what we're looking at. This is technology that people lived in. We don't understand it today collectively because we have been programmed and taught and conditioned to take the modern world, the way it is today, and project it onto the old world, onto the ancient past, and say, well, now it doesn't make any sense because we're comparing it to today. But the conditions existed a long time ago that were much different, where the atmosphere was electrically amplified and people had to deal with huge thunderbolts of the gods that reached down, fiery serpents that crawled their way across the skies, ghosts, balls of light that hovered about and rolled around chasing people. So people worked with what they had. They learned quickly how to manipulate their buildings, their structures, their carriages, everything to make themselves safe, but also to utilize this influx of energy that was being given to them. Free energy. Energy you didn't have to pay for. Energy that wasn't so low because the earth is charging it and it's keeping all of the energy for itself right now. It was ample amounts of energy. So a long time ago, people built wondrous, gigantic, magnificent structures like these cathedrals, huge ones that are just geometric in shape and seem to follow cymatics and advanced forms of mechanics and what do you call that? Architecture and science and things like that. For example, these are the shapes that are created through cymatics, which is sound waves. And we see those exact same shapes replicated in these cathedral windows, which tells me that they were working with cymatics. They were building these structures to work with the natural energy that was coming up out of the earth and naturally present in the atmosphere. So within these cathedrals, oftentimes they don't have windows, they don't have walls, they're almost completely sealed off on the inside, huge echoey chambers. What do? They line the walls with a pipe organ, with musical instruments, all on these walls, gigantic, huge ones. Now, the reason that they don't have any windows, I mean, they have stained glass windows, right? Hold on, I just got a warning. I just want to make sure everything's good on my live stream. I'm just resetting here just to make sure everything's good. I hope it is. Okay, it is good. All right, sweet. I have a lot of things running on my computer right now, so hopefully everything is okay. If not, let me know in the chat and I'll check on stuff. But anyways, so these cathedrals were basically sealed off. They had stained glass windows and stuff, but those windows only had small vents for opening. They weren't windows so people could see out or anything. They were to vent the accumulation of energy that came up from the cave systems that these cathedrals were built upon. These cathedrals were built on top of what I call places of power, which are the escape routes of that energized ionized gas or plasma that comes up out of the earth every other cycle. Now, the earth energy is healing. It's not the type of plasma that will electrocute you or shock you or anything like that. It's a cold plasma and it's ambient, and it sanitizes and it stimulates collagen and elastin, and therefore allows for longer living and health benefits and whatnot, right? So we see evidence of technology at work in the architectural structures of the time. Oftentimes, old churches, old holy grounds or holy places. Holy just means set apart or much different than everything else, right? These were places of power. This is shown to us in the movies once again. This is a clip from Indiana Jones where he's in this ancient church that's been converted into a library. And X marks the spot. They actually have to go down underneath this church into catacombs. Underneath many of these ancient structures are caves. They're naturally occurring caves. Sometimes they add to those caves and they dig around or whatever, but we go down under these holy places and we find catacombs, places where today we project upon the past and we say, oh, it's a graveyard. It's just an underground graveyard. Listen, how much sense does it make, especially for those of you who grew up within religion or religious communities, how much sense does it make to build the most holy structure, God's house, on top of a graveyard? It's sacrilegious, to say the least. You know what I mean? Unless that's not the story. We have these huge caves, huge structures that people think were graveyards and just areas to just stick some dead bodies, let them decompose. In the ancient times, it's a known story that Christians were hiding out, aka living in these cave systems, in these catacombs. If they were just full of rotting, stenchy, nasty, dead bodies, I'm sure that wouldn't have been a good idea because they would have gotten sick and probably been added to the collection. You know what I mean? And these things are huge. Look how much room is down here under the catacombs. Now, the catacombs did end up being a place for storing a whole bunch of bones and leftover bones and dead bodies. You know how many skeletal remains of entire bodies that there are in all of the world's catacombs combined? Millions upon millions, right? I find this to be very interesting. So just as a quick recap, we've touched on mud floods. We've touched on the ancient past as a precedent for the old world. Now we're looking into architecture such as castles, cathedrals, catacombs. We'll look at temples in a minute, star forts, Gothic styles, pillars, domes, obelisks. We looked at strange events from the 1700s that are evident of some sort of cataclysm happening to the world, or significant change at the very least. Now we're going to talk about these catacombs for just a moment. Now, people would ask me and have asked me, if there are these ancient cataclysms, where's all the dead bodies? Where's all the evidence of all the people that died? This right here could be that evidence, okay? Now, I don't know if you knew this or not, but a long time ago, something happened, especially in France. France is one of the most popular catacombs. They went around the graveyards and they started digging up bodies that were already buried, taking the bones and tossing them into the catacombs. to make room. Now, the official narrative says that, oh, well, the people started to complain of the stench or the smell, and there was some mass graves, and they just, the bodies were all rotting. You have to stop and ask the question, wait a minute, what? If people were complaining of a stench of rotting dead bodies from mass graves, it only takes like a couple of years for a body to actually rot into a skeletal structure, and then like 50 years for that skeletal structure to just turn into dust. So why were they digging up all of these? Why did they even have mass graves? Now, some people would put forth, and ChatGPT told me, it's most likely due to the bubonic plague or one of the other plagues that happened. Well, the closest plague to this mass digging up of dead bodies and exhuming these graveyards to take all those bones and stick them into the catacombs, the closest plague was like 70 years prior, which meant that there wouldn't even be bones, that the bones would have turned into dust up there on the surface because they would have been exposed to the elements and stuff. So something's wrong with the story. And this is what I like. I like doing this myself, and I respect and appreciate when I see other people, especially on YouTube and online platforms, researching, asking questions, right? That doesn't mean that we're all right about our theories. It just means that I support the active discipline of being an autodidactic or a self-taught person, somebody that looks into these things for ourselves, right? Here you can actually see on these catacomb walls where it looks like there used to be some objects that were hung up here. They have like a balcony up here. This looks more like an underground city than it does to me a graveyard. I don't know what you guys think. Let me know. But here's a really good one too. I like this picture the most as a catacombs because it has this blue light down here. And this is just symbolic for me of the blue light, which is ionized oxygen and other gases that rises up from within the earth, filling these places, right? Now, when we have a depressurization of the atmosphere, cosmic electricity comes into this world. So we have a mix. This is why this is why those are the times of magic, like the Middle Ages and stuff, why we have references to wizards and witches and magic and stuff like that, because this is magic. Plasma is magic. Electromagnetics is magic. And the people worked with that magic that was ambient in the air all over the place, so much so that they had to protect themselves, and then they used it, right? Like with their building styles. This is not just artistic. It's artistic to us now because we forgot its purpose. Originally, these buildings were practical. That's why they look the way that they do. They work with the electromagnetic field that existed amplified, in an amplified status in the ancient times, in the old world. So you have pagodas and things like that that look like lightning arresters and other types of electronics too. You can actually see one on top of this pagoda right here. And there is a plasma volcano. I mean, in this world, it's not plasma, it's just a regular volcano, Mount Fuji. But in the next world to come, plasma will shoot up out of that. That will be a beacon for people in the nearby area during a time when the world has been depressurized and it's hard to see because it's darker, there's fog all over the place. People will flock to these light sources, these places of power. They will settle there. This is why people today live on active volcanoes, because their ancestors went to those light sources and those places of power and they settled there. Those became the first cities. And the people benefited from the energetic, the abundance of energy that came up, positive, good, life-giving energy that came up out of the earth. Now, there was also something to contend with, which was the serpents from above, the cosmic energy that comes down and comes into our world beyond the firmament, right? Which is probably red spectrum ionized hydrogen, if I were to guess. This one's interesting too, because they also have this is in Tokyo, and they have their own version of the Eiffel Tower, right? Many people would say, oh, well, the Eiffel Tower, that was just built, for decoration. It's artistic. Why is that artistic? That doesn't even look cool. There's nothing artistic about it. It clearly serves a purpose whenever you look into the old world, the ancient world, and how those structures worked with the electrical fields of the atmosphere. We can see what's happening with these towers and these obelisks and other things too. And I just want to say thank you all so much for your support. I see a lot of people joining my channel memberships and making donations and stuff. I really appreciate it. Silly, welcome to my channel. Good to see you. Now, here's another one. Take note of this shape, right? You'll notice that many of these structures, oftentimes, when they're 100% designed to work with the electrical atmosphere, the amplified electrical atmosphere, they will be made of conductive material, or at the very least have conductive material placed at the very tops, right? So for example, we've got this sort of style. Looks like a Hershey's Kiss, like a metallic Hershey's Kiss or something, just sticking right up out of the ground. And this behind me, these are different lightning rods, okay? These are different shapes that lightning rods can take. You can see right here behind me, one of the shapes that the lightning rod takes, which is that sort of Hershey's Kiss image or style. Same exact that we have here. People have forgotten about what happened, about these cataclysms and resets that fill our atmosphere with energy once more. And we go through these shifts. Sometimes they're big ones, right? The longer we go without a depressurization event up here on the surface, the worse the cataclysm will be when it does happen again. But we go through these little instances and cycles. This one right here is actually nearby to where I live in Colorado Springs. This one used to be an ancient courthouse. You will find this type of architecture on ancient courthouses, on prolific buildings from the founding fathers era, on what do they call it? Capitals, right? The Capitol buildings, right? And you'll see that at the very top, sometimes they're green, but that's because the metal has changed color over time. But they always have these domes on the very top, and then these columns and pillars, and then you can see those very same Hershey's Kisses shapes. I went to this building. I asked the curator. It's now a museum, and that's another thing they'll do too. But this used to be an old courthouse or a place of power. I asked them what these were. They just said it's decorative. They just said it doesn't serve any function or purpose whatsoever. But we now know that these are lightning rods, that they are designed to work with the electrical atmosphere of the time. Domes attract electricity much better than spikes do, or pointy tips, right? The pointy tips tend to flood the atmosphere above with positive energy, and the negative buildup is what causes lightning to strike, right? When you have an electrical charge, the negative charge at the bottom of a cloud is what creates these huge lightning strikes, or in the old world, thunderbolts of the gods, right? So whenever you have these spikes, metallic spikes that shoot up, they actually flood the area above it with positive energy, which dissipates that electrical charge, or that negative electrical charge. They help to reduce lightning strikes. They're not trying to attract it. Now, the opposite of that is domes. Domes, especially those made of conductive materials, attract them a whole bunch. So this is the area where they wanted electricity to go. This is the area where they wanted the electricity to avoid. Okay? Now, the more we study this, the more we will learn and piece together the old world. Here's another example. This is just another lightning rod. As you can see, it's got a fixture at the bottom, so you can attach it to a building. Same Hershey's Kisses style. You also see this on ancient buildings. This one's in Constantinople, where you have this castle-like structure from yesteryear with these giant ornament Hershey's Kisses. I'm just going to call them that at the top. These metallic Hershey's Kisses, right? They're lightning rods. Same thing in Russia. When we have these, beautiful, I mean, obviously the coloring and stuff may be artistic or whatnot, but the shapes definitely are not. They're functional. They serve a purpose. And that purpose was to work with a different atmosphere. Different times. They were completely different times than we are living in today. That's why when we look back at things like the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, they seem foreign to us. This is why we find stories and entertainment within the Wild West and the Victorian era and whatnot. This is also why you have Gothic style buildings with all of these spiky, pointy parts of the building that's shooting up. And it happens to be the origin of what do you call those? Steeples. This is the origin of steeples. This is why steeples are put on top of holy buildings and places like that. Sometimes the building itself served as a steeple, a giant rod that just shoots up from the earth. And you can see all these smaller little spires and stuff. They're not just rods. They have little points that stick off of them. You see those, how it's like little points sticking off of the rod that goes up to a point in and of itself? That's the best shape for lightning rods to take. You have these branches that stick out. Also, one of the reasons why people decked the halls with boughs of holly or other spiky nettles or things like that in their houses. All of these holiday traditions were basically to keep ghosts away so they didn't get attacked or killed or shocked or possessed by or whatever these strong electrical charges that were floating around down here on the surface at the time. So we've got domes, spires, obelisks, pointy architecture made out of stone and stuff. We also have star forts, right? People that knew about these electrical currents or magic that existed in the world, and they built their entire cities. At least some people did. These people had certain knowledge. The people who established these, and you can see they're oftentimes surrounded by water, like this star fort right up here, this one right here, all surrounded by water, because water can act as a conduit for electricity if it has an electrolyte inside of it. If it's not, and it's pure water and has no bitterness to it, then it will actually keep electricity out, and the water will act as a barrier to electricity. Here's one of the most well-known of the star forts. This one has a huge lightning rod right in the middle in the form of the Statue of Liberty. So we've got the rise of star forts. We also have this type of construction where you'll see a long promenade or a park or something that's a straight line, usually left alone to nature or filled with water, a waterway or a watercourse. On one side, you'll have an obelisk or a lightning rod where they didn't want the lightning to actually strike. Now, it's grounded, so if it does strike, it can manipulate the current and take it, to somewhere else. But they have a dome on the other side. You'll see this replicated time and time again going back into the old world, where people built these concourses for harvesting and storing electricity in the form of their buildings in their places of power, where the energy was the most, or these vortices or dragon lines or ley lines or whatever it may be, right? So they were manipulating this. I believe, and it's been my theory for a long time, and probably others as well, that there's underground structures, including capacitors, that are designed under the right circumstances to collect energy, to harvest it, and to store it underground. Now we're going to come back to underground when we talk about pod people, Cabbage Patch babies, and things like that a little here in a bit. So here's another example in Paris, France. Also in Paris, France, you can see how the city is designed. This was designed around the Arc de Triomphe, or the Triumphal Arch, the archway right here, right? There's a whole bunch of people moving around. All these people carry with them their own energetic signatures, and they actually fill these grids with energy, just like a microchip, just like a computer would. And if you look at this and you zoom out, you can see it looks like a microchipped Earth, right? It looks like some sort of grid. But this one right here, the Arc de Triomphe, this is the best shape for a magnet, is this horseshoe shape or arch shape, right? It's the strongest a magnet can be unless you make it 360 degrees, in which case it's a bowl shape, right? So you have electromagnetics all around. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world around the exact same period, you have people that live in shacks and crooked houses and log cabins. This is actually Abraham Lincoln's log cabin. And I'm going to give him a shout out later, but now that I'm thinking about it, because he brought this up too, I want to say thank you and a huge shout out to the channel called My Lunch Break. I'm unaffiliated. We don't know each other or anything, but I really appreciate and enjoy some of the points that he makes coming from his own perspective on things like the old world. And the oxymoron and the contradiction that seems to exist between Abraham Lincoln's very own house. Oh, somebody just donated a whole bunch of channel memberships. That's awesome. Abraham Lincoln and his very own house, and then all of these grand mega structures. Remember whenever I showed you, and I'm going to come back to that, and I showed you the old world structures, or the World's Fairs, and those magnificent Greco-Roman buildings and concourses and obelisks and domes and all that stuff. For example, in ancient Chicago, right? You have those types of structures that coexisted with, meanwhile, Abraham Lincoln's shack and, log cabin and wooden houses and people out front making clothing and stuff like that, right? So there seems to be some sort of disconnect between the two that existed. So we've got Abraham. This is actually Abraham Lincoln's father. So I'll read this to you. It says, "The man with the axe is Thomas Lincoln, Abraham's father. The property represented here is in the best sense not poverty at all." Oh, the poverty represented here is in the best sense not poverty at all. They're saying this isn't poverty. Hard physical labor directed with intelligence, according to one's own judgment, ensured plenty of food, fuel, and sufficient shelter. It's just commentary on the image. However, when we compare this Abraham Lincoln's dad trying his hardest just to survive out in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. Meanwhile, in France, they're walking around sophisticants with lightning rod technology sewn into their clothing, that they had lightning rod fashion back in France. It says here, lightning rod fashion was a fad in the late 18th century Europe after the lightning rod, invented by Benjamin Franklin, which I highly doubt and I don't believe. Lightning rod hats for ladies. Now think about it. If the lightning rod is designed to attract lightning, people wouldn't wear this as clothing, right? It's not designed to attract it. Lightning rod hats for ladies and lightning umbrellas for gentlemen, or parasols, were popular in France. Well, if it had no use and served no purpose, what's the point of it, right? It did have a use. It did serve a purpose, which was to stay protected, to stay safe, to walk around outside in confidence that you wouldn't die or get struck or judged by God. However people saw that. And I did a whole video on it. Look for this thumbnail. It's called 1700s Lightning Rod Fashion, which existed in ancient France. Now, the whole Benjamin Franklin thing, that's, back in the 1700s, one of the founding fathers, they'll say things, history is fabricated. They say he discovered electricity. Not true. They say, well, he did this kite experiment, and the genius that he went out in an electrical storm with a kite and tied a metal key to it and just flew a kite in an electrical storm. That's not true. None of that ever happened, okay? But people make up these stories and they try to elevate these quote-unquote founding fathers to the level of almost godhood. You can see they put little cherubs and angels around him and stuff. They do the same thing with George Washington, which many of these people, I'm not convinced that they actually existed, especially George Washington. Here's another example of an ancient drawing from a manuscript that shows a fireworks display, according to the legend. But over here off to the side, what do we find? People with what look like lightsabers or swords that are casting electrical circuits and charges between the two, right? Here's another example of this big light show that they had around this castle. But if you look very closely, you can see at the tops of the castles, there are these little structures and they're glowing, right? This is called St. Elmo's fire, which is plasma. Okay, this is a time when the atmosphere was electrically amplified and they were able to put on marvelous and wonderful light shows, even getting out swords and stuff and putting on this huge electrical sword fight, just like you see in Star Wars and stuff. So these are different examples from the old world of people that are outside in the open air with metallic swords and stuff, and you can see lightning coming out of their swords when they're out there on public display. And audiences are watching, from a distance or whatever. I think I actually see some people right back here safely standing behind this fence or whatever this looks like over here, right? So they're sort of guarded and standing away from all of it. So to me, it's evidence that during the old world, there was more... Times were different. The conditions in this world, the atmosphere was different. And there was an electrical current that people used, basically. This is the original structure of the Eiffel Tower. Let me show you this. So the Eiffel Tower doesn't look the way it was intended to look. Let me just get out of the way here for you. All right, boom. See, right where I was, that's the actual Eiffel Tower. This is the way it was supposed to have been built. It's got these two other towers right next to it. These are the original ideas or schematics for the Eiffel Tower itself. We have this one. I mean, it screams that it's working with the electromagnetic field. This isn't just art. They didn't just build this for no reason. Now, this is what's known as Antiquetech or ancient technology. Let me jump back into the live stream here. This is antique technology or antique tech or Antiquetech, which is a word that I like. I'm not sure who coined that, but thank you very much. But this is Antiquetech. This is ancient technology, forgotten technology. Why is it forgotten? Because our atmosphere is no longer electrically amplified to such a degree that we understand that magic is real and it exists, and that there are an influx of ghosts and strange sightings and dragons and serpents and fireworms and stuff crawling around the skies. This was not built as a showcase for a World's Fair to just show off, like, look at what we can do. You know what I mean? later on, they ended up using the Eiffel Tower as a radio tower. And then the official story is, oh, we just kind of discovered that it could be used for that purpose. This one is in Japan. That one's in England. This one is in France, or, you know, the schematics for it at the very least. Now, speaking of Antiquetech, let's jump back to the 1700s, before the United States was even founded. And let me show you this pamphlet real quick, okay? Up here, you've got some sort of theater, some sort of building, some sort of structure, stage, very Victorian, fountains coming out of the building, running water, huge, ornate, beautiful statues, these sort of pyramid looking hedge deals or something like that. But if we back up a little bit, you can see up here. Hold on, let me move, make sure you guys can see what I'm looking at here. Yeah, you see up here in the corner, this woman playing a piano. Okay. You see over here, there's a kid writing and another kid writing right behind my head. Those are robots. I kid you not. Okay. Robots from before 1776. Actually, if you take a look, there's a date right down here. I just want to show it to you so you guys can see. It says here in French, Représentation des ouvrages de mécanique inventés et exécutés par les sieurs, which means these are robots that were invented by the man. These are those robots. They still exist today. We still have them. These are the exact same ones. This robot android woman was programmed to play this little harpsichord piano. And it doesn't like, it's not like a music box was stuck inside of it. This isn't like the Turkish man where there was a human really inside playing chess with people or anything. This was an actual autonomous, or automaton, as they were known at the time, self-working, self-moving robot. This one right here was the drawer, or the writer, basically. This one right here drew pictures, and as you can see, it's in the middle of drawing a picture right now, this creepy robot, and it draws actual portraits and pictures of things. And the eyes move and they follow the movement of the keys on the piano, and they're writing and they're drawing. Actually, let me read this to you. I have an article pulled up right now that's kind of summarizes it. Franco! Hey, thank you, Franco, for the donation. Now, let me get this pulled up. This is going to blow your mind. Check this out. Oh, actually, hold up. I just saw something I skipped over. So remember that comet that had 6 tails that I told you about? I have this note that's up here. I just want to mention this real quick. So that comet with 6 tails, it says here the comet was also noted in Japan, where researchers found in Chinese astronomical records some Chinese observations described audible sounds associated with the comet. The comet, right? You could hear the comet. Think about that. Right? Especially in comparison to what we're told about comets and how far away they are and stuff. No way you could hear a comet unless it's under the dome, unless it's nearby, right? But if it's not a comet and it's just the Septon trio and different plasma volcanoes that are, you know, going off during these depressurization of the inner Earth, then yeah, you would hear explosions. You'd hear vibrations from the electricity and stuff. So that's interesting. Now, let me get over back to these robots. 1700s robots, also known as automatons. These ones right here were created by Pierre-Jacques Droz in 1768. That's before 1776, right? And it says here, among all the numerous automata that were built by him, these 3 doll robots, automatons, were built between 1768 and 1774. And there's one called the musician, the woman, the draftsman, and the writer. The dolls are still functional. Over 300 years old, still functional. Robots from the 1700s. The dolls are still functional and can be seen at the Museum of Art and History in Neuchâtel in Switzerland. They are considered to be among the remote ancestors of modern computers. This is before the Declaration of Independence. There was also a 4th automaton called the Cave, which is not pictured. Let me tell you a little bit about this. So the woman, the musician, I'll tell you, this is the guy that made them. Okay? Hidden hand, enough said. Okay, if you're in my little circle of communities here on YouTube at the very least, you already know when you see a picture of someone doing like that, they are the Freemasons that are exhibiting the hand gesture for the hidden hand, or the hand that is at work but hidden from the world's population. This is the guy that made these, right? So let's take a look at this musician one. It says here, the musician is modeled as a female organ player. The music is not recorded or played by a music box. The doll plays a genuine, custom-built instrument by pressing the keys with her fingers. Movements of her chest show her breathing, and she follows her fingers with her head and with her eyes. The automaton also makes some of the movements that a real player would do, such as balancing her torso. The Draughtsman. The Draughtsman. About the Draughtsman, it says, the Draughtsman is modeled as a young child and is capable of drawing 4 different images: a portrait of Louis XV, a royal couple, believed to be Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI, a dog, and with an inscription written next to it that says, my doggy, and a scene of Cupid driving a chariot pulled by a butterfly. These robots could draw. They could talk. I don't know if these ones could talk, but there's other ones around the same times too that could talk. The Draughtsman works by using a system of cams that code the movements of the hand in 2 dimensions, plus another dimension to lift the pencil. The automaton also moves on his chair, and he periodically blows on the pencil to remove dust. Robots before the Declaration of Independence. The writer. This is the other one, the writer over here. The writer is the most complex of the 3 automata. Using a similar system to the one that was used for the Draughtsman for each letter, he's able to write any custom text, up to 40 letters long. The text is rarely changed, and one of the latest instances was in honor of the President Francois when he toured the city. The text is coded on a wheel where characters are selected one by one. He uses a goose feather to write, which he inks from time to time. This robot, this android, is dipping the pen into the ink and actually, check this out, including shaking of his wrist to prevent the ink from spilling. His eyes follow the text that's being written. His head moves when he takes some of the ink. Antiquetech, ladies and gentlemen, made by the Freemasons. Now, real quick, I just want to point this out. In my newest book, Return to Hyperborea, I go into more detail about the origin of the Freemasons, who they really are, if they are evil or not, what influence they had in establishing the very first major cities, or, like I said, becoming nomadic and taking over those cities. So do check that out if you're interested in more on the subject. Now, let's get back to these cathedrals real quick. Places of power that were filled with terrestrial energy, magic, okay, power, plasma, cold plasmas that came up into the building. People would go there and they were healing centers. They're called cathedrals because they are cathodes. It's electrical in nature. People would come in here, they would play the music, they would resonate and use harmonics and cymatics to tune the frequencies to have different effects on the people who were inside of the building, right? Usually healing effects or amplifying your brain and your synapses and other things too. I visited one of these here in Colorado Springs, and I saw these on the ground. I'm like, what are these? They look like school bells or something. And the woman that gave me the tour told me these are vents that vent up gas from underneath the cathedral itself to allow it to come up. Now, some people will say it's to cool it off because there's no windows or anything, and people speculate all day long. But this is where the plasma and gases that were ionized came up and flooded these areas as the people are singing and being joyful and literally tuning themselves, right, within these places of power. Cathedrals are not the only places. If we go further back into antiquity, we find that the very pyramids across the world themselves are built on top of bottomless pits, cave systems, and that they seem to be generators or buildings that were designed to work with the electrical charge that was coming up out of the earth, right? Now that takes us to the age of exploration, right? Like I said, we really go back to like around the 1300s, which was the end of the last age of light, when all of these beams and pillars were constantly shooting up for an entire age. Those pillars and those beams have made appearances as there's little fluctuations in the small depressurization events from inside of the Earth. So they'll make little appearances, but they won't stay. So it doesn't give us a whole age or anything. It just gives us a cataclysm. But if we go back to the end of the last age of light, which is actually the dark age, because everything is flipped upside down because we live during the season of Satan. So everything is the opposite of what it really is. And people have opposite perspectives and beliefs and stuff. We go back to the age of exploration, or the alleged age of exploration, right? Right around the exact same time, around the 1300s, right? All of a sudden, people from all of these European countries, for the most part, up in the Northern Hemisphere, decide that they really need to expand. They really need to go to the ends of the Earth, which, by the way, is a euphemism for the North Pole, or for Hyperborea. That's the end of the Earth, is right there in the middle, where the four corners meet in that island. And we have all these different explorers across time. I believe, and if you look at portraits of these explorers, they're doing the same types of hand signals. Like this one you'll see a lot. Sometimes it's like that. They'll hide their hand. They'll have all these gestures and stuff. It's because they're related to these tribes of survivors that survived these apocalyptic events in the past. They retain the knowledge. They pass that knowledge on to their progeny and their ancestors and stuff. And then they send out all these explorers. They themselves, the nobility, they don't go looking. They don't go on these dangerous quests and stuff. But they were not looking for spices. They were not looking for cinnamon. Hey, let me take my entire fleet and risk the people's lives and spend all this money so we can get a little bit more sweetener. I don't believe that story. I have to start asking questions about it. Something that comes up quite often in the stories of all these explorers, one, are the strange and anomalous things that they encountered across the world, from mutated tribes of humans to strange wonders seen in the heavens and the skies. But also, the fountain of youth comes up time and time again. These people were looking something that was worth their time. Not cinnamon, not salt, not spices. They were looking for home. They were looking for the place of emergence, or what the Hopi call the back door of the earth or the world. Right? They were looking for paradise. They were looking for the Garden of Eden. Now, let's take a look at the World's Unfair. Okay, the World's Fair, right? They have all these fairs in a time during the Wild West and before. People are barely on their feet. You know, this is people trying to just survive and stuff. And they, for some reason, get these... Listen, this was like... There wasn't air travel back then. I mean, I'll show you air travel. They didn't have like motorized planes and stuff like that at the time. So it's not like people could just, buy a plane ticket and go to the newest World's Fair in Brazil or in England or, wherever it was, Switzerland, all these different places, right? Chicago. Travel wasn't that easy to come by. So you have to ask yourself, why do they have all these strange world fairs? Why do they go through the trouble of spending these structures? Right? I looked up some of these structures, the cost of some of these as facades that are just temporary, and they're just made with stucco, and they're just going to take them down right away, which there's some truth to that, okay? I'll explain that in a minute. $400,000 in the late 1800s. That equates to about $13 or $14 million today. At a time when everyone was struggling, at a time when Abraham Lincoln's father is hacking away to try to build his log cabin. This is a great example. So this one right here is from Chicago. People take a look at this and they're like, that's Chicago? Hold on, there's something wrong with the story here, right? This huge man-made lake, this whole walkway, the dome at the end, which oftentimes these domed buildings have a hole at the top too, okay? Because they're working with electricity, all right? This is basically a dome, or acts as a dome magnet that can produce a beam of energy or a beam of light or a capital, to signal a place of power or whatever. Anyways, so back in Chicago, here's a side view. So you see the statue right here of this like Greek-looking god? Here it is right here, close up, and here's a side view from the promenade. Right? Everything you're looking at right now, millions of dollars worth of time and energy and building and manpower, burned deliberately, purposefully. All of this was set ablaze. Stucco, marble, rock, stone, wood, whatever the different parts of it were, none of this is left. It was all burnt up. And if you look it up, they admit it seems to have been done purposefully, right? So that raises the question, especially when you find instance after instance of all of these amazing structures, architectural marvels, especially those that are like made of stone and non-flammable materials, just being destroyed and erased from existence due to just a random fire. Once again, the channel My Lunch Break points this out exquisitely. So here's another example of these immaculate domed buildings with these water courses out in front of them. Huge, gigantic Ferris wheels that basically hold small houses, you know, that people were riding and stuff. Here's another example. This one's in New York. It's called the Crystal Palace of Brent Park in 1853. Another example of these domes, spires, and what appear to be architecture that works with the electrified atmosphere. This one looks like it's from 1800. You can kind of see they have like, sometimes they would build little not Empire State Buildings, Eiffel Towers and stuff like that, right? Ornate statues, carvings. People put a lot of time and effort into this. Now, naysayers, which there are many, they'll come out and they'll just easily dismiss. They'll minimize all of these things. Mounds and mounds of evidence, which when put together becomes so heavy that one has to take another look at them, right? Or I do. And others do too. They'll say, oh, these were temporary. They're erected real quick and they take them down. Well, there are many examples where that's absolutely not the case. Here's the building from the World's Fair with the dome on front of it and the water course and everything. Here it is today as the Museum of Science and Industry. Still standing. Wasn't dismantled, wasn't taken down. It's still there today. You can go walk around and look at it. Now, here's a picture of them building it. So some people have a theory that the founding fathers just stumbled upon Greco-Roman structures and stuff. I think that, you know, there may be a case for that, but I also think that these quote-unquote founding fathers, Freemasons and whatnot, like I said, they're descendant of advanced tribes that survived the deluge, that survived various apocalyptic cycles, and they passed on secret information so that their progeny, so that their ancestors moving forward could live in comfort, as you would probably want your family to as well, I imagine, right? So they set up their family, they set up their children and grandchildren and so on and so forth so that they can live in comfort. These are their natural building styles. If that's the case, they're just building what they naturally know how to do. They're taking advanced ancient knowledge or prophetic future knowledge, which is the same thing, and they're just building the way that they know how to build. Sometimes they build huge structures where you can see a huge difference between, you know, the rise and the level, like where the dirt is and stuff like that. So some people think they may have sank into the ground. Other times, like the Capitol building of the United States. This is it today, you may recognize, a big dome structure. Oh, it's just artistic. That's the only reason for that. I don't think so. I think it was useful. This is what it looked like originally before it was redone. It was just a dome with the hole at the top, right? Working with an amplified electromagnetic atmosphere, right? Here it is again, the Capitol building of the United States, when it was much earlier and much younger, before they, you know, made it look like the way it is today. Here's another example, ancient courthouses. Like I said, you see this in Back to the Future too. This is almost like a perfect copy of the one in Back to the Future with the clock tower right there in the middle. Oftentimes they will put clocks on these towers. Oftentimes they seem to, you know, be designed to draw electricity from the air, possibly to charge the clock and keep it going or whatever. These columns and pillars, I believe that they're used to direct the flow of that electromagnetic charge. And oftentimes these buildings, the first floor is way up here on the second floor. What is the purpose of that, right? Sometimes it's possible they sank. We have an entire city, right, in Italy. And what's that city that's sinking right now that I'm looking at right now? This city. Damn it, what's the name of the city? Italy. Fudge. Somebody tell me in the chat, because I spaced it. But you know what I'm talking about. There's a city in Italy, Venice. Thank you. So Venice in Italy is acknowledged. An entire city that's sinking down into the earth. Water levels rising, you know, possibly due to the heat from the sun and the earth itself getting much hotter. When water heats up, it expands, and therefore the water levels would rise too. But this whole entire city is sinking. Nobody questions this. Nobody goes, I don't know. I just think it's a coincidence. You know, I don't see any evidence that there used to be a street here or anything. That's probably the way it always was. They were just probably really liked living on the water. No, like if you look at this, it begs questioning. You can see it using your imagination, which is a key part of understanding these things, balancing logic with imagination. You know there was a street here. You know this wasn't always underwater, but this is a city, Venice, that we have accepted as just being flooded. Right? And if it was, I'm at the bottom of all this water in the parts with soil and stuff, it's probably mud and clay and other mixtures, where it's not like cement and streets and roads and pavement and stuff like that too. So you can imagine that this happened in many places all around the world, places that had huge, magnificent structures, just as Venice does, that were flooded through liquefaction. That brings us to balloons. Now, I'm using this one as an example of the 1893 Chicago's Columbian exhibition. These World's Fairs are so interesting to look into when it comes to the strange and anomalous things that they presented. Air travel is what we're going to talk about next. But before I do, I want to give a huge shout out to my lunch break, okay? He probably doesn't know me. I don't know if he watches my channel. I never spoke to him or anything. But it's a great channel, and I'm going to list some other ones too. If you're interested in the old world topic and these anomalies and Antiquetech and stuff like that. Here's my lunch breaks channel. I would highly recommend you guys to go over there, check out some of his videos. You can tell him JayDreamerZ sent you if you want to. You don't have to. But I just want to show my support for my local truth seekers that, you know, that I watch and learn from. So great channel. He talked about these airships and brought these to mind. So I looked into this. Also a part of the old world. Like I said, they didn't have airplanes and all that type of stuff. They had actual ships, sometimes what looked like boats, like vessels, that were attached to giant balloons that were lifted up, that had rudders and fans and stuff where they were trying to figure out how to navigate the skies. Look at this one. There's another one way back there in the distance. I didn't even notice that. Check this out. Wow, they're really detailed when you zoom in on them. You can see the people inside of this box and everything, right? Here's another one way off here. So you can see it's kind of tilted and they're manipulating it. They're airships. These are much different than hot air balloons where you're at the mercy of the wind. You could go up or down. That's it. These were steerable air dirges. They were airships. And this seems like fantasy to us today because they lived under altogether different conditions. There's a good reason why they don't show you ancient pictures of people trying to make airplanes and stuff, but instead have these huge inflatable balloons that have actual boats tied to the balloon with ropes and some sort of air rudder, right? This is something you see in science fiction. This is something that is noted in fantasy and cartoons and comic books that depict steampunk technology and a steampunk world. The steampunk world is real. Okay, now all that steampunk stuff comes from a post-apocalyptic world where the atmosphere depressurized, things floated up into the heavens and the sky and stuff, and then debris landed back down on the earth. The survivors rummaged through all those piles of trash and junk and garbage and debris, looking for relics, looking for anything that might be of use in a post-apocalyptic setting. This is one of the very first ones. These are actual ancient sky vessels, not just hot air balloons, but as you can see, they equipped them with rudders on the back. Looks like this is attached to a bathtub or something. They have little wings, little flappers and stuff trying to navigate the skies. Gigantic balloons as well. That's another thing that we'll take note of. If the pressure was different going further back in time, and if the atmospheric pressure fluctuated due to pressure being added from the underworld or released from the firmament, then we would expect aeronautics to be affected by different and varying atmospheric pressures, right? So whenever you have more atmospheric pressure, right, more pressure in the air around us, it's easier for things like jet engines and propulsion and planes with propellers and aeronautics in the modern sense to exist, because you can easily push against the air because of all that pressure, condensing it. But whenever you have a pressure release and there's less pressure, then those things don't really work. Okay, they might work to a smaller degree, but what is more practical is a gigantic balloon that you fill up with a gas that's readily abundant and coming up out of the earth naturally anyway. So people used that gas, knowing that it floats up and it goes up into the air, filling up these huge balloons that they would traverse from country to country in. They crossed the Atlantic in these gigantic balloons, sometimes known as zeppelins and whatnot, right? Here's some older pictures of some of these sky balloons. What else do you call those? Airships, right? I like airship better, right? Because it has more of a fantasy feel to it. And I like that because fantasy is real. It's just cartoonified. It's cartoonified history and reality. But these airships, people easily could make their own. They could figure out how to navigate an airship and they could go from place to place. Well, they don't like that. The government doesn't like that. They want to restrict travel. They want to keep you in one place. They want to keep their slaves in one area where they can be in charge of them, right? This one actually has like a little boat attached to it. Here's another Zeppelin type with a little boat underneath it, sky boats and whatnot. This one's called Prince's Aerial Ship, Star of the East. And this one has some sort of giant fan wheel on it with like an American flag over here. And look at how gigantic this is. There's people on the bottom walking around on a platform in the sky with a building on it. Now you might think, well, this is just an artist's concept. This is just fantasy. That didn't actually exist. It's not actually real. But I have a picture that I'm going to show you from the World's Fair of a floating building that they tied to a balloon. Here's places where you could actually go and rent your balloons or buy your airship. It says airships right here. So airships, actual boats that were attached to one or more balloons that people floated around to navigate the skies in the 1700s, right? Now this is more of a steampunk version, but I wanted to show this so that I could show you it's real. Okay, steampunk is not fantasy. It's not fiction. It's just an embellishment. It's just a cartoonified version of real, actual events that we draw out artistically and cartoonify in our minds, right? Now, check this one out. This one is from one of the World's Fairs. It says Exposition Universelle 1894, Antwerpen. At the top, we've got this gigantic balloon, and it is tied to and holding up a house, a mansion at that, okay? I think if I were to zoom in even more, you might even see there's a little dot right there. I think that might be a person, but notice this underneath it, okay? This is real. This really existed. I looked this up. I had studied this, and this apparently actually was a floating mansion that was tied to a balloon, and this right here was an elevator, an ancient elevator from the frickin' 1800s, 1894. And the people down here at the bottom at the World's Fair, they called this Chateau Aurélien, which means floating castle, basically, loosely translated. The people would get into these elevators. There's one right here, actually. You see this one? There's an elevator that's attached, and they would ride the elevator all the way up and get off into this huge mansion that was a floating house in the sky, a floating castle. They made these in the old world. This is actually, I just wanted to show you, this is from the National Air and Space Museum website and the Smithsonian, and they have a whole article that displays, this floating castle idea. Here's other ones. These are more hot air balloons. So before they actually had the ability to try to steer the ships, right? And they became more prolific at navigating the skies. It was pretty much balloons that had ships attached to them. Pardon me. Which is why they're called airships, right? As you can see here, it's clearly a boat. It's a sky boat, right? People rode around. There's even a net. This guy's climbing the net, just like it's a ship, like a pirate ship or something. But these are the pirates of the air, the pirates of the sky. And they learned how to navigate the skies in these balloons. Now, if there was less pressure in the atmosphere, you would need a whole bunch of gas and stuff, and it would be much easier to just lift up into the sky instead of trying to force yourself against, no pressure at all. And this makes sense that we see the change from these hot air balloons under less pressure circumstances, possibly, to airplanes and jet engines and propellers and things of that nature, right? So basically, this is another form of quote unquote Antiquetech or lost technology or, mechanics and whatnot that people latched onto and moved about. These people flew across oceans and giant bodies of water to get around. This one's actually a sleigh. So you can see here, they had these flags that they used to communicate, it looks like, riding in their sky sleighs, their balloon sleighs. So you might ask, well, if they came from the North Pole, if they came from Hyperborea, and that's what they're looking for, shouldn't we find evidence, especially around the time that the hot air balloons and airships became popular, shouldn't we find evidence of them trying to get to the North Pole, or at least explore it to see if maybe that's Hyperborea, maybe that's the Garden of Eden, maybe that's home? We do. This right here is a photograph, an authentic photograph of a hot air balloon crashed in the Arctic. Down here at the bottom, it says the crash of André's balloon on July 14th, which is the French Independence Day, I believe. Record 1897. So this photograph of this balloon crash was taken in 1897 of the actual spot taken by a member of the expedition and now developed 33 years later. There's a lot of coding in this little newspaper article. The balloon partly deflated and the gondola trailed along on its side. This balloon was trying to get to the North Pole. And then they just happened to have a professional photographer there in the late 1800s who just went out and just took a casual, candid picture of their air balloon trying to make it to the North Pole. Other attempts were made to try to get or return to Hyperborea, try to return to the North Pole. Pretty much all of them failed, okay? There are stories where people just started making it up and say, yeah, we flew over the North Pole, we made it or whatever, but I don't find any evidence of that. Now, let's skip over to Tartaria or Tartaria, which is a huge part of this old world studies, right? That there was this nation, this whole tribe that sort of spread out around the earth, a huge empire known as ancient Tartaria, and it was full of people known as the Tartars. Actually, the Tatars or the Tatars. Originally, the name Tet is it's a reference for a glyph, which is the island at the North Pole, which is a circular continent that is put into quadrants or separated into 4 lands by 4 rivers. These are the 4 rivers of paradise in the Bible in the Garden of Eden. Tartaria, or the Tatars, are the people from the land of the Tet, which is a circle with an X through it, which is the Hebrew letter for the number 9. And also the Phoenician letter too. Anyways, so the Tartarians originally were called Tetars or Tatars, and it's 2 words. Tet, which is the Garden of Eden. It's just to get right to it, and then Or, which it could be Ir, which is a suffix in ancient Norse, which implies it's plural. So those from the Tet. It can also be Ar, which means light. So light beings from the Tet, or those from the lights of the Tet, which is basically the center of the world. Tartaria. Many people don't believe that such a place or such a people or such a nation or such a tribe ever existed. However, when you look on ancient maps, you find it time and time again. And one thing I would like you to take note of are these tents. Okay, I'm going to point this out. I recently heard somebody doing a discussion on the old world. Like I said, there's naysayers out there that will just dismiss all of these mounds of evidence and say that they're just coincidence. And this person said there were no Tartarians that set up shop in ancient America, the ancient North American continent or the United States. I'm going to show you where they were. Take note of the Tartarian style tents. These are typically what they lived in. Okay. And you can see it talks about the Tartarians living in these pointy sort of circus tents. And there's a reason why they look like circus tents as well. The Tartarians were nomadic in nature, okay? Barbarians, Tartarians, in some cases Mongols or Manghouls and other things. These tribes, basically, that were nomadic in nature, that came from Hyperborea, came from the North Pole, or were kicked out because there was a cataclysm, they couldn't stay there, and then they became nomadic, and they circled around the northern hemisphere, getting lower and lower over time as they integrated themselves into the local surviving populations, right? But these are their tents, okay? That's something I just wanted to point out. Ancient Tartaria. You can find them on many ancient maps. Usually it's written over here somewhere in northern Asia or Siberia. That's because this is where they came from. There's a sea up here in the Arctic that on ancient maps is called the Arctic Sea, or, I mean, not the Arctic Sea, the Tartarian Sea, or the Sea of the Tartars, right? Sometimes it's called the Scythian Sea or ocean or whatever. However, this is the map of Urbano Monti, 1587, somewhere around there. I can't remember the year, but it's the Middle Ages, okay? Or the late Middle Ages. This is the United States. You can see this is the Gulf of America or the Gulf of Mexico right here. This is Florida. This is Texas. This is Mexico down in here. This is California split off into the ocean, basically, or possibly Baja Mexico. Some people would make that argument, but that's not what I'm looking at. If this is the United States, okay, and this is Canada up here, aka North America, and we zoom in on it, we find the same exact Tartarian tents. As a matter of fact, we find Italian and Latin writing that says, these are the Tartarian tents. These are where the Tartarian people stayed. And you find these on this particular map all around the northern hemisphere, up towards the top. Because when this was written, that's where they had moved to, these lost tribes. So that's evidence that you can look up for yourself and find that the Tartarians did live in North America, as well as many other places, right? Now, see right here, I told you it says Scythian Ocean, right? Scythian is another word for like Tartarian, Phoenician, etc., and so on and so forth. Those tribes had different names because they were just described in different ways by different people. But ultimately, this is where that old world technology comes from. It comes from Atlantis, survivors, relatives, ancestors of the Garden of Eden, of Adam and Eve, quote unquote, from Hyperborea, from all of these mythic and legendary islands of creation, or the Hesperides, or islands of the Titans, or gods, or magical islands, or phantom islands. They come from this place. These people have been searching for home and trying to figure out where they are after a cataclysm befell their world and changed all of the cardinal directions, changed the stars or the sky or the heavens, and they had no idea where they were. They became lost. I mean, imagine the world had flooded. You quite literally wouldn't know where you were, especially if there was a huge vapor canopy immediately afterwards. You would just be lost. You'd be the lost tribes looking for home. You use your advanced knowledge because you live much longer than most other people do, because you're from these places of power that energize the soul and the body, and you go down into these foreign places and you bring them technology, and you bring them advanced ways and advanced forms of architecture and advanced forms of mechanics and gardening and other things too, right? And you exchange that knowledge without having to do any work at all. You exchange that for other forms of value that they give to you in return, like physical objects, like houses and land and property and animals and other things too. So they set themselves up as traders or traitors, depends on how you look at it, right? Where these people were able to just do almost next to no work at all and exchange their vast knowledge and ability to help the local populations or improve their quality of life. By the way, this is the Urbano Monti map. Just in case you're watching and you're out there and you would like to look up the Tartarians in North America, it looks like this, okay? Also, I'll point this out. This Antarctica has no ice. And Tierra del Fuego down here is connected to Antarctica, right? Which tells me that this is a time when the water was less. There's also a land here at the North Pole, That's Hyperborea, okay? It's not there now, but if you look at these ancient maps over time, you can see that there was different depressurization events where the inner earth depressurized, the waters rose a bit more, and every time this happens, they rise and rise and rise, and basically they cut off Tierra del Fuego so that it's not connected to Antarctica any longer. But this is Antarctica without any ice whatsoever in the 1500s, okay? These explorers were looking, in my opinion, for a way home. They were looking for the Garden of Eden. And basically there's a race to get back home. There's a race to the center place. Now, here's this exact same map, the Urbano Monte map. If you look up in above Siberia, right, like I showed you in North America, where you can find the Tartarian style tents, which are these types right here, right? Or I could just scooch it. I don't know if I can scooch it over. Yeah, so these types of tents, these are Tartarian settlements, right? Bargo was one of the main Tartarian settlements, but they came from Paradise. So hold on, let me back up. I just want to show you and give you an idea. So the center of this map, actually, let me go back. If you look at the center of this map, this is the Garden of Eden. This is Atlantis. This is Hyperborea, okay? And let's see. This over here is like Europe and stuff. And up here, they came down through one of these areas and they just settled in this place, okay? And then they just started walking around in a circle, right? But if you take a look, it says Mare Settentrionale Glaciato, right? Mare means ocean or sea. Settentrionale is that word septentrio, which I discussed earlier. This is the ocean where the 7 mountains or the 7 trees or the 7 plasma volcanoes that surround Hyperborea, just on the other side, are from. These are also where the Pillars of Hercules come from and the origin of the Pillars of Hercules. The Pillars of Hercules are not symbolic columns that somebody erected as little statues or anything. They're always shooting up out of the water in ancient depictions. There are these pillars, these columns that shoot up out of the water because these are beams of light that shoot up from anode and cathode plasma volcanoes on either side of the septentrio. That gives us 9 lights total, which if you look off in the distance and you can't see where it's coming from because you're very far to the south, you will see what you think is a 9-tailed fox or a 6-tailed fox or however many lights happen to be beaming up into the sky, okay? And people would interpret it as different omens, okay? Now, as far as the cover-up of Tartarian history, this right here is a CIA declassified document, and I'm going to read this to you. It is about the cover-up of the Tartarian Empire. It says, and this is just, in case you want to look it up for yourself, it's called the National Cultural Development Under Communism, approved for release in 1999, okay? It says, let us take the matter of history. And I'm just going to read the highlighted portions, okay? Here again, the communists have interfered in a shameless manner. They issued a directive ordering the party's Tartar Committee to proceed to a scientific revision of history of Tartaria. In other words, Tartar history was to be rewritten. Let us be frank. It was to be falsified. Rewritten history to distort the facts so that Russians appear always in the good light. Histories which present the facts truthfully have been withdrawn and destroyed. Declassified. CIA government document about actually rewriting history 1984 style in the Ministry of Truth. And that gives rise to these ancient buildings being filled with lunatics, crazy people. This is called a lunatic asylum. These huge mansions, huge houses that they started just shoving anybody they wanted into as makeshift jails to experiment on humans. That's the main reason why these things were built, in my opinion, not to help people with mental disabilities or, mental problems or whatever. I know that obviously that's how it's going to come across. It's easier to sell it if that's what you tell people you're doing. And this one is, this one clearly looks sunk now that I take a look at this one. Look at that. That bottom level definitely looks kind of sunk into the ground. Don't you think so? Right? But these lunatic asylums, right? This is shown to you in the movies too. It's Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, the X-Men. This is the school for the X-Men, for gifted and talented X-Men. It's basically a castle, right? many people that were rounded up and shoved into these lunatic asylums, crazy houses and whatnot, oftentimes are people that were imbued with more power than your average person. People that came from these places of power, or their families did. They descended from a lineage that allowed them to have telepathic or telekinetic abilities and other things. So they were being studied for the most part. There was also, probably people with real mental disabilities, whatever. But my theory is that there were these people that lived in places of power that were affected by that power and therefore became powerful or power-filled. And so they were collected, rounded up after that power went away because they were a threat to the powers that be who were trying to take over the world. They rounded them all up. They experimented on them. They tried to figure out how they're able to do these things, much like in Stranger Things, like how 11, the whole story of 11 and Stranger Things, very similar to all of that, okay? And this is something that happens over and over and over again. And then we have the rise of a huge population of abandoned children. People they want us to believe that this was a normal story, that all these children were just given up or lost, or it was just too tough being a parent back then. As a parent, as a good parent, I see myself in a pretty good light. I very much love my children and I love their existence, and I would never sell them off or trade them away or anything like that. The orphan trains, right? If you don't know what the orphan trains were all about, hundreds of thousands of children that allegedly were just abandoned or runaways or whatnot. There were so many of them that they stuck them on trains on the East Coast here in the United States. This also happened over in Europe. And they sent them off to the West Coast and they started planting, just like seeds. They just started planting people all across. They started seeding the United States with humans to get that population back up. But not just to get the population back up, to get their population of these humans that may have been grown, not abandoned, right? Follow me. This is my theory that I'm just putting out there, okay? Something is up with the orphan trains. Something's up with all these abandoned children, all these bad parents across the Northern Hemisphere. Hundreds of thousands of kids being just escorted out of, major cities, especially New York at the time, and just sort of planted across the country. It's like they're getting ready to establish and boost the population of this new land that they discovered or whatever, right? This is, to me, slave labor. Okay. And if you watch a lot of these ancient movies, the protagonists, I'm not ancient, but older movies, oftentimes the protagonist on many movies is an orphan. Okay. Pay attention to that and see how many times you start realizing, wow, the orphan is always the protagonist, right? This is shown to you in The Wizard of Oz, where you have Dorothy. She's an orphan. She lives with her aunt and her uncle. No one ever talks about where her parents are. Dorothy may have been grown for slave labor as a clone, or as a type of clone and underground. Now, this takes us to the Cabbage Patch Children, which was really made popular, in my opinion, by Mind Unveiled, which is another channel that gets a huge shout out from me. And I know that they probably watch my channel, so thank you guys so much for watching and whatnot. But anyways, they were talking about how they noticed on these ancient postcards and depictions of babies that they were always shown growing out of these cabbages. And I'm going to put that in strong quotes, right? These cabbage babies, or growing out of pods also. Very similar to our fiction, very similar to our movies where beings are grown in these pods, right? Just like the gremlins here are, you could just basically say that's a cabbage or something, right? Also in the movie Cocoon, this was shown to us that people were grown in these pods. They're pod people. Now, the pod people, if there's a place where this is happening, and it's clearly a form of advanced technology, if this was happening in, 16, 17, 1800s or whatever, I believe the most likely place is under the earth, in deep underground bunkers or deep underground cities. The earth opens up down underneath the earth, and the legends and the myths and even religions and stuff too, they all indicate that under the earth is advanced societies, that we up here are actually way behind because they have way more energy inside of the earth, and it makes sense to me. So I offer this: suppose that people, humans are being grown by quote unquote Tartarians, Phoenicians, barbarians, whatever you want to call them, advanced civilizations or remnants thereof or relatives thereof, and that they grow and set apart human beings underground. And if they do, and they're cloning them, then they would be clones, right? A lot of these would actually look the exact same, so you'd have to mess with their DNA to make them different, right? We go back to the old world. They had infant incubators with living infants, it says, as opposed to with dead infants, right? It's almost like the infant came with the incubator. Not that the incubator was used to help out some newly born human on the surface, but more like, hey, this is our fresh supply and we need to keep them alive and keep them warm and keep them growing up here on the surface, right? Possibility. It's possible, I think, right? Just to ask questions, because some of these things are really anomalous and strange and weird, but we see this all throughout our fiction, right? There's the movie with Scarlett Johansson called The Island, where they literally grew clones of actual people that lived on the surface, and maybe this is why they're collecting people's DNA. I'll put that out there too. There's this huge task that everyone wants you to like look up your genealogy, even though we all know you're only going to go back 100 years or so, okay? For the most part, okay? I know my grandparents, that's it. All right, they want to get you excited to give away your DNA. Or if you get arrested, now, legally, they'll just take your DNA. They'll do a swab, they'll invent diseases so that you need to swab it and turn it in or whatever. They're collecting DNA samples for a future Noah's Ark, so to speak, right? So that they can regrow their own populations in the place where the survivors know how to survive, expect an apocalyptic event or cataclysmic event at the very least to come, and then they retain their knowledge, they retain their power, which is in the form of knowledge, and then they just grow these human beings and condition them to think whatever they want them to think, to act however they want them to act, and to basically establish their own monarchy, their own countries and stuff. And this brings us to the rush to the North Pole, the rush to get back home, right? This is the place where it all begins. This is the place of creation. This is the back door of the Hopi, like I mentioned before. This is the Garden of Eden, etc., and so on and so forth. This is the center, the middle of the world, not some spinning, flying ball Earth nonsense, but the center of the realm that where we live in our plane of existence. And all the countries are rushing now, right now, fighting over land that is close to the North Pole, that is close to Hyperborea and the Garden of Eden, if in fact it is there, which I believe that it is. This reminds me of Trump in the news. Wants so bad to buy Greenland, to take Greenland away, right? People have gone on these expeditions to the Arctic. What for? If it's just all ice, or if it's just all water, because they can't make up their minds what it is, why are you doing these expeditions? It's the same thing as saying the Eiffel Tower was built for artistic reasons, for display. Well, I just want to go there just to say that I went there. No, I don't accept that. It doesn't sound reasonable to me. You go there because there's something of value to be had there. You know what I mean? Like, I understand people sometimes do things just to do them, but this is way too far back in time without all the proper technology and stuff to be able to get you there. And then you have all these different countries that are vying to try to find the actual North Pole, or sometimes it's the South Pole. This is one example. This is Admiral Byrd, right? Naval Admiral Byrd. This is his plane. It's called Fokker, right? Some of you might be thinking of a movie right now, but he took his plane on his Arctic expedition, and he has a lost diary, allegedly. This looks like the What Me Worry dude from the Mad magazine. You see that dude right there? That's interesting. Anyways, that's besides the point. Admiral Byrd allegedly flew to the North Pole. It was a big deal. All these people that try to get to the North Pole. Another one of note was, what was his name? Wiley. Damn, I forgot that guy's name. He was a comedian. Anyways, I'll just skip that point. But all these people are trying to get to the North Pole, right? Admiral Byrd was one of them. Took an airplane, when we could finally fly airplanes, to the North Pole. He has a lost diary, allegedly, that says that when he got towards the North Pole, something took a hold of his plane, right? Made out of metal. as he's flying towards a magnetic mountain. Keep that in mind. His plane turns off. It seems to be flying all by itself. And then the record says that he descended into the bowels of the earth, into the underworld, where he saw an advanced civilization of giant humans that treated him as an honored guest, took them before their leader, and he was welcomed and he was warned. And he was given a message and told, you will be our emissary to the human population on the surface. There is a storm coming that will destroy your world. And if you don't believe me, look it up. Okay, I didn't have time to put it up here. But this is allegedly what Admiral Byrd was told. He was warned about the plasma apocalypse. And then he was sent right back up to the surface world with good tidings, where he met with his military, who immediately put a gag order on Admiral Byrd, told him, don't ever talk about this. He was interrogated for days, and that's right up there in the North Pole area. Also in Greenland, at the northern tip, so this is Greenland right here, we have these military bases, one called Thule, which is reminiscent of Ultima Thule, which is another word or another euphemism for Hyperborea or the Garden of Eden or a terrestrial paradise that actually exists on Earth. And up here in Greenland, they had what they called Project Iceworm. And they still probably have this. They're trying to say now that, oh, you know, we've declassified it or whatever, but they're still lying about its purpose. They say that it was these underground caves that they were digging to hide nuclear missiles or bombs or whatever. I don't believe that story, which is the story that is now being declassified, okay? Up here, this is the northernmost tip up in this area up here of Greenland. It's the closest continent, or not continent, country, to Hyperborea that still is above water today, but it's all frozen over. So what did they do in Project Iceworm? They dug miles and miles and miles of underground tunnels and networks up there in Antarctica. Why? What is the purpose? To hide nuclear missiles? I don't think so, because all of the world's governments, to me, are basically ran by the same entity, the hidden hand. Right? So they must be doing something else and just feeding us a garbage story to make us think that they're really fighting each other and they have our best interests at heart, when in reality, it's the same family. It's the same tribe that's trying to find their way back into or break into the Garden of Eden, where they have been kicked out previously, right? So now they're going to try to go up toward the north and tunnel there. Why? Because you can't get there above. Okay, so there, like I talked about the Ouroboros and, you know, the force fields and stuff that exist up there and the electrical fields, but these are the underground tunnels of Project Iceworm. Now take a look right there in the middle. I just happened to notice this while looking at it, but this is the staff of Hermes with the winged staff and the ball at the top, right? That ball is the inverted dome at the top of the apex of the firmament. The staff itself is the beam of light that shoots up from Mount Meru, acting as the light of the world, and the wings on either side of it are how it branches out and creates the phoenix, or it branches out and creates the thunderbird, or this cosmic bird of creation, as it's sometimes cartoonified as and seen as. And that is indicative of a pressure release from this central place. This is that central island at the North Pole. This is the Mercator map of the Arctic. This right here is Greenland. And as you can see, all you really have to do is just follow Greenland to its tip up here in the, you know, northeastern section or whatever, and this land goes right up to Hyperborea and nearly touches it. There's a couple of islands off here to the side too. I believe that this land exists. It might not be as big as it looks in these maps because it's distorted, because they projected it upon like this concept of the ball earth or whatever, but this is probably what it's all about, in my opinion. Okay, I believe that this is all about something much more valuable than wars or technology or anything, but it is all about returning to an extended lifespan. Okay, when you live on this island, when you live in the Garden of Eden, you live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, because the conditions there are amplified energetically, and they allow you to live for a very long time, which allows you to have so much more experience and not live and die as a child, which we do from 0 to 100. Okay, if you live to be 1,000 years old, you're basically 10 years old if you live to be 100. okay, comparatively speaking. These people want to go back to find the most valuable thing in this world, which is the thing that gives life, which is the fountain of youth, which comes up out of this plasma volcano, surrounded by water, coming up out of the water, as we discussed, that splits this central land into 4 different quadrants. They're looking for that, and they have always been looking for that. And when they realize where it is, you will see a rush, a race to the center of the maze so that they can get back to Wolf Mountain, or the mountain under the moon, or Harmon, the mountain of the moon, Hermon, right? Mount Hermon. Now, this is the old world as I see it. Other people out there, like I said, there's going to be naysayers. They're going to say, oh, look at, this is it. This is over, all right? We're not talking about the old world anymore. We're not having any of that. Look at all these men. These boys desecrated a fiery cathedral. This is, you probably know what movie this is from, right? These are the different people, including myself, that are interested in these subjects. Some people out there are not interested in these subjects. They don't see what we see. They don't believe in Mount Meru or, mythic or phantom islands or things of this nature. They have a different perspective, and that's okay. But some people don't want to encourage others to look into it. Right? They try to get them on their side, and they try to really pump people up to say, you need to be on my side and plant your flag here, and we're against them. When in reality, we're truth seekers. We should be coming together. So if you see people that are saying, is you is or is you ain't my constituency, are you on my side or not on my side? Then I say, be very careful of those types of people. Okay? Use your own judgment. Follow your intuition. Look into the things that interest you and resonate with your experience and your path, your truth-seeking path. Now, that being said, I want to give shout outs to some channels that I am subscribed to and I follow and I support. Conspiracy Are Us, looking into the old world. JONLEVI, one of the more popular channels, also looking into the old world and resets and mud floods and things. Old World Exploration, the Lost History channel, TKTC. I think they have a couple of channels. LUCIUS AURELIAN, Mind Unveiled, as I mentioned before. JARID Boosters, talking about things that he shouldn't, snoogans. And, of course, My Lunch Break, who really kind of inspired this whole presentation. Like, I mean, I touch on, the old world stuff from time to time or whatever. And he does such good presentations, and his opinion is so compelling to me, and it's so reasonable to me that I'm like, I would like to touch on this too. So that is my presentation. I'm JayDreamerZ, and this is my presentation on the old world and the evidence for drastic changes in our world and in our atmosphere that essentially reset our entire way of life. Let me know in the comments if you guys enjoyed this presentation, and I'll see you next time. Until then, I'm JayDreamerZ saying good vibes and goodbye.
Forcing me to stay. It's time to wake